Hi guys, it's Herman Kriel here, Jim for CyberTech. We've decided that we wanted to have a quick fireside discussion around some important topics. So for today, I thought we would introduce or invite along Alan Storey, which is the Chief Product Officer for Intercede. So what we decided for today, what we want to do is really to talk about securing the financial workforce with strong authentication. As you know, and as you would have heard in the news a couple of times now, making stories and headlines are companies that are in for the wrong reasons in the news, companies that would potentially have lost data purely because their workforce aren't sufficiently protected, or the data isn't sufficiently protected through a protected workforce. So we thought it's an opportune time to really have a discussion around what makes strong authentication? Why is things like a password simply not cutting it any longer? Why is it that you would look at alternative measures to really look at in protecting your data and protecting your workforce? So Alan, thank you very much for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking some time off to have this discussion. It really is an open discussion around, what are the things that we are plagued with, things that we need to really look out for, and how we can really help an organization or a customer protect their environment a little bit more, a little bit better, so that the malicious entities would rather look at their competition and try and attack them instead of themselves, if they have all the necessary and proper solutions in place, obviously, of course. So maybe to start off with the discussion, there's been a couple of breaches that I've just mentioned or spoken about, but maybe let's just go a little bit deeper into what are those breaches that has happened.
Okay, thanks, Herman. So one of the big ones that's obviously very relevant to South Africa is the Experian data breach. So this was about 24 million records of South African citizens lost by Experian. And that happened by a fraudster actually posing as a legitimate client. So they contacted Experian, they got all the data, and they managed to siphon all this data off. The real problem there is that Experian should really have had measures in place to make sure somebody posing as a legitimate client really was a legitimate client. So they should have had those checkpoints in place, and they just didn't. So that's 24 million records of South African citizens, which is a huge problem for Experian as an organization. And the boardroom discussions tend to be at the level of there's an increasing level of fines. I know being from Europe, we have GDPR where we have an increasing level of fines. That's data protection regulations. I know you have something similar with POPI in South Africa. And that really comes down to, if you're not doing what you should, if you're not following best practice to protect your data and protect yourself, the level of fines is going up. So that's hugely important at the boardroom level. But it's also the reputational damage. As you said, these are in the news. Nobody wants to be in the news for those reasons. It's for a firm that's job is to protect data and provide data. That's not what they want. And the final one is just the ongoing ability to do business. There is a huge cost after you've had one of these data breaches. Just to pick another example, Marriott, for example, Marriott Hotels, they lost about 5.2 million records of their people who visited their halls, or all the information they lost. And that was two hackers actually managed to steal the credentials of employees and get in and start accessing the data. We're not quite sure whether that was by credential stuffing, so that's whether you've got some passwords you've bought on the dark web and you've played them in, or whether it's phishing or spear phishing, so they're deliberately targeting, trying to steal records. The scary piece is once they've got those records, they were inside the system for a month before it was noticed. So start to think, what could those bad actors do within my system within that 1 month? In this case, they stole 5.2 million records, but they could have been planting malware, ransomware, all sorts of things. So it is absolutely a big problem, and the question is not, should I protect myself, but what's the best way to do it?
Sure. And I think it's quite scary to know that your personal data are now out there and anybody can actually virtually get access to it and don't have a problem with it.
Yeah.
Whereas before, you knew it would have been protected. You trusted entities, you trusted companies to ensure that your data remains safe. After all, it's your personal data. And all of a sudden, it's as simple as going onto the internet and you can find your data there, and it's personal data. So, and I think
Yeah.
that's sort of a wake up call for any person to see, all of a sudden, here's my data out there. It's people that I trusted, and despite all the systems that they have in place, um, people still manage to get information. So it's clear that it's actually now moved quite a lot from trying to penetrate through a firewall and doing things like that, all sorts of funny things. Now it's really just the people have caught on, the malicious entities have really caught on to say, hold on, it's so much easier. I can just target people. And it really comes down to identities and credentials. It's not really about firewalls and those things anymore. The hardware. It's really about.
No, you're absolutely right. It's moved on from keeping the bad guys out to how do I let the good guys in. It's a slightly different mind shift. So especially in the worlds of COVID and more remote working, people accessing systems from homes and different IP addresses that people aren't used to. It really does come down to that. Is it the right person? Very, very much like Marriott and Experian, you need to have something in place that says, is this person claiming legitimate access to my data? Are they who they claim to be, and should they have it? And that comes on to the really starting to look into where the problem is and what's the main thing to focus on. So most organizations have a number of back-end systems where somebody who legitimately is trying to access it has an account. So a bank, for example, they might have network access, remote access, Teams type of applications, payroll type applications, etc. And there's normally a real person who tries to access those accounts. That person then has a digital identity. So that typically is a one-to-one mapping between an account on a back-end system. So Alan.Storey, Intercede, for example, is me. And then there needs to be something in between that digital identity, which is the representation of the person in that digital world, and the system they're trying to access. And that's a credential. So that could be a password, it could be a smart card, it could be a YubiKey token, it could be a one-time credential and an RSA token. All of these things are credentials. And the bad actors trying to attack these systems will look at the weak point. Where's the easiest place for me to get in? It's relatively difficult for me to get in and create accounts on back-end systems because I need to be already inside the system and have admin accounts to do that. The weak point in the chain is that credential. So if I can guess, steal, reuse, learn somebody's credential, I can then in effect become that person and I can get inside the system. And that's the real point that the attackers are going after. So you mentioned there's lots of data out there that you can buy on the dark web and you can use. Frighteningly enough, a lot of that information is passwords. So you can actually get those passwords and then you can just try replaying them systems until you get a hit.
Crazy. So, okay, so we now really know that there's a problem. We know that where the problem lies and how easy it is to get access. What's the impact really? Maybe just take us quickly through what the impact has been on some of these breaches. So that we can just really understand it's not just something that's sitting out far. It's really something that's very close to us.
No, absolutely. So there are some pretty scary numbers out there. So there was a large study done by Verizon, specifically saying that 81% of these data breaches were caused by passwords. There tends to be different numbers between about 70 and 85%, but normally they come at about 3/4 of those data breaches. But there's also been some very specific studies, as he's saying, on the cost. So IBM did a study over a 9-month period in South Africa, looking at the average cost of a data breach to an organization. And that came in at 40.2 million rand. That looks like a scary number, and I know sometimes when I speak to people, they go, well, that's just nonsense, that's too big, that's just Intercede inventing numbers to scare people. But the reality is that was a study where they'd actually spoken to people who'd been subject to a data breach, and they asked the end organizations what was the cost. This wasn't somebody making it up. This was accountants in the end organization saying, okay, well, there's potentially a fine, but even if not, there's a cost to actually change the security measures. There's a cost to inform all the people, a cost to put short-term and long-term fixes in, a cost to update the data. So these are real figures from real organizations. So it can be a huge cost, just a financial cost, regardless to the reputational damage. And the bit that actually scared me the most from this study was that the average time it took, and again, this is from a real world study of people who've been subject to that breach, before they found out they had been breached, was 177 days. So these people are inside your system for an average of 177 days before you even know it's happened. The horse has bolted by then. The data's out there. You've lost the information. It's quite worrying.
So for half a year, you as a company might not even realize your data has been lost, and it has gone off with it. So I think that is quite scary, and it's also scary to know that as an organization, you can probably stop to exist purely because you did not manage to protect your data sufficiently by applying all measures possible to ensure that the data remains inside the organization and is only allowed to be accessed by people that is really entitled to it. And I think that's the scary story. Thank you for sharing that with us. I think that is quite insightful.
Yeah, and I think the obvious place then is to, yes, it's a problem. What's the biggest cause of the problem? And it is that weak credential. It is that password. So most organizations are looking at, how do I get rid of that weak credential?
So previously we spoke about authentication and lack of proper authentication. Things like passwords. Passwords in itself is weak. It's easily guessable. It is something that can be deducted from just talking to a person. We all know about social engineering, things like that. So we all understand passwords are quite weak, and it's something that we should try and avoid. The question now really is, so what else is out there? I know the next generation was one-time passwords or one-time pins, as a matter of fact. So is that really the ultimate, or are there something that is really out there that one can apply to really strengthen your access control, strengthen the access of the people that should be there, but at the same time ensure that you don't strengthen or harden it to such an extent that you cannot really access your own data simply because it's just hardened too much. So what is really out there that one can look at? What is it that you would be looking at?
It's a good question, and this is exactly what organizations are facing today. So they've decided that they want to protect themselves against data breach. A weak credential, typically a password, is the number one cause of a data breach. So I want to replace it, but what are the choices? There are lots of different options out there. So we tend to use something we call the Authentication Pyramid to try and describe the different types of authentication and the pros and cons between them in levels of security. So the higher you are up the pyramid, the more secure you are. So starting down the bottom, we have the password. It's not really fit for purpose anymore. I think most people really get that now. The primary reason is it's only a single factor of authentication. So I only need that one thing. Once I've got somebody's password, I can be that person. You can guess it, you can steal it. The biggest challenge is reuse these days. So if an organization does what it can to protect its passwords, it can split them up in a database, it can hash them, it can encrypt them, all of these things, it can force strong password policies. If somebody uses that password for another system that doesn't protect them and it gets leaked or stolen, then you get the problem of somebody stealing those passwords, buying them online, not just the passwords, but an army of bots, software packages that can just sit there and play those passwords at systems until you get a hit. So you're not just fighting one person, you're fighting an army that's attacking.
So hold on. So hold on. Sorry, what you're saying is that if I use a password for my company access, and I use that same password somewhere else, and that there's no proper controls around it, my password could have been leaked out, and potentially, if somebody's clever enough, they can come into my company and use my password, the same password that I use somewhere else, and actually therefore successfully access my account, being me, basically.
Absolutely. So password reuse is one of the big problems, and it's really hard to stop because we're human beings, and we should never forget the importance of the human being in that security chain. If you try and put something in place that doesn't work with the people who are using it, it just won't work. So passwords, single factor, reused, easily stolen, easily replayed, and quite hard to spot that somebody's doing that. So that's the big problem. You mentioned one-time passwords. There's a couple of ways these are used. So this is a code that's generated, typically lives for about 15 minutes. So it's still a password, but it has a limited lifespan. It can be sent out to a user via a phone. So you can send it out via an SMS message. Banks use this sometimes. Or you could have a dedicated device, Vasco or RSA token. I'm sure we've all carried these around in our time, where you have a little number displayed on the screen. So the way they work is that there's an authentication server that tries to calculate what will that token do at this particular time. Sometimes it's based on an event, sometimes it's a time, but there's a shared secret between the server and the object that's creating that one-time password. And that, while it's significantly more secure than a password, in that it can support 2 factors of authentication, so something I have, such as the device, and some of them support entry of a PIN, something I know as well. So as an attacker, you need both of those factors to be that person. There are still some attack vectors against them. So you can potentially, if you can get access to that central shared secret, you can calculate what that token would do at any time, which is very dangerous. And depending on how you're delivering that one-time password, if it's, for example, going over an SMS message to a phone, SMS is not a secure delivery mechanism. It wasn't designed to be secure. So you can potentially scrape that in transit or from the phone. And if you've got that within that 15 minutes, you can then be that person. So is it more secure? Yes. Is it secure enough? Not really, not in today's world. You then start moving up to what we call cryptography or crypto-based authentication. This is where you have a private key on a device, never leaves the device, held on a secure place on the device, and a public key associated with it. And the way that works is that every time you try to access something, that the application you're trying to access or a server generates a completely random challenge and sends it down to the device. That challenge can't be reused for anything else. It only works that once. What you then do is you digitally sign that challenge with the private key on your device. That typically involves you entering a PIN or putting a finger on a reader, if it's a phone, for example. So you have those 2 factors. You have the device, the thing I have, and either the fingerprint, something I am, or the PIN, something I know. That sends that challenge back to the server. The server can then verify that with a public key. So that private public key is basically it's almost like a digital signature. So you can verify it, but you can't actually create it. So you can't be that person, but you can verify that that really is that person. And both FIDO and PKI use that private public key cryptography method. The main difference between the 2 is that FIDO doesn't bind that key to a person. So that works very well in a consumer environment where I may have a FIDO identity for my bank or my network provider or an e-commerce provider, and there is no real relationship between those parties. But in the enterprise, you very much want to know who is accessing my systems. So back to the Experians and the Marriotts, if we knew it was actually the right person accessing the data and not somebody impersonating them, we'd have been okay. And that's where PKI comes in. So PKI uses that private key and public key, but it also has a certificate that binds that to an individual. So that allows you in an organization to have one credential that you can use to access multiple systems, so you can tie it back to that person. So we think that is, for an organization, certainly the gold standard of security.
Great. So the certificate that you have really only belongs to you, and it cannot belong to somebody else.
Absolutely. Yes.
All right. So I suppose maybe a little bit forward, we'll start talking about how do we do credential management, because I suppose it really comes down to that, and I think in a lot of people's minds we have a challenge by saying, but it's quite difficult to manage people coming in, going out, what access they should have, what access to what systems they should have. So I would like to talk about that going forward a little bit later. For me, the real big thing is, so if we've got the two-factor authentication, we've got the certificate, we've got the challenge and response, if I can call it that. Will that be sufficient in a large organization? So
that's a really good question. So when you're talking to chief security officers and IT people around, they need to, is it enough? Is it secure? Can it do what I need it to do? And there are very few standards around this area in terms of digital identity. So people are often faced with a huge range of choices and vendors telling everybody that their system is the most secure and will do everything they need. But it's hard to validate that. Of the standards that are out there, there's FIPS 201 in the US, which is a government standard set deliberately to identify government employees. Are they who they claim to be? That's very widely used and has also spread out in the US to banks, to aerospace and defense, and other organizations who are looking to follow best practice and best standards without reinventing the wheel. And that's PKI based. So the primary digital identity in that system, be it on a card or a phone, is still PKI based. If you look at EIDAS in Europe, so this is around digital signing and access to those records, that's PKI based. And the vast majority of government schemes and access to government systems is based on PKI, just from personal experience. So our product issues and manages PKI based identities. That's used to protect US citizen data. It's used to protect access to military helicopter plans. It's used to protect access to systems that track nuclear material, and it's used to access air traffic control towers. So that should give people real confidence that PKI systems work because they've been tried and tested in the field in the most secure areas.
It makes sense, and even on top of that, even if you don't know about all these security and the places where it runs, if you think about it, everybody's moving to digital certificates, electronic signing, electronic documents, and like you said, PKI is really a crypto-based solution. So as we also know, if you apply crypto or cryptology correctly, there's very little chance in it being broken. I know there's a lot of R&D that goes into this. There's a lot of R&D that goes into how can it be broken, and it keeps getting upgraded on an ongoing basis. So if you think that your certificate that you might have or that you're being issued to sign on into a system at the office, as an example, can only probably be broken into in a couple of thousand of years from now. I think that's quite secure in the sense of it's far more secure than my password that I would have guessed or thought out or written down on a piece of paper or used in a different application. I think it just makes sense to say that it's the way we are going right now in terms of certificates that we use, in terms of cryptology that we use in other areas. So why does it not make sense for us to use it for our employees to actually log on to our systems that we've spent millions of rands on to secure it, and just spend that little bit extra by ensuring that our people that we log on, the people that we trust, are really the people that should have access to it. It makes really sense for me.
It does.
So we've come quite a distance now in terms of our discussion around, credential management or credentials, and why it's so important to not just use passwords any longer. I think we've established as well that, with certificates that we have in all sorts of other things, these digital certificates and cryptography should also really be applied. I think it just makes sense to say that it should be applied on how we as users actually logs into systems, access data, access different solutions that runs in our environment, etc. So for me, the challenge would really be around how do we manage this mass of information that now we get bombarded with? Because, it's not just a simple password that we need to change any longer for a person. It really is this entire credentials of this person that they would have. We're talking about certificates, we're talking about PKI, we're talking about different users, different applications that they can or cannot access, etc., etc., etc. People that migrate, people that move from different position or from one position into a different position, people that joins, people that leave. So it becomes a job on its own and a nightmare on its own if you don't manage it correctly. So I know and understand in your environment, you guys have also already thought about these things, you've sorted it out. So maybe just talk us through that, through the need for credential management then as well, please.
And it is a really important point. So it's if you can't trust the credential you issue, can't trust the system that's issued the credential, you can't end up trusting that in Credential. So I think this really comes down to three factors that all work together. The first one is integration. So any system that's going to come in and manage your credentials, manage the delivery of them to your employees and make sure that the right people get the right credentials, has to integrate. It has to work with what you've already got. And that comes down to working with the certificate authority, Entrust, PrimeKey, Microsoft, we don't mind. You then have to communicate with the device. So that could be a smart card or a mobile phone or a virtual card, such as Windows Hello for Business, for example. So you need to communicate with those. You typically need to talk to a source of user data. That could be a directory, or it could be an identity and access management system, such as ForgeRock, SailPoint, Ping, Okta, etc. And you have to make sure all these systems work together. You may be talking to smart card printers. You may be talking to a hardware security module to secure the keys and make sure that the communication between all these systems is secure. So you have to have that system in there that connects to all the different parts of your environment without having to change that. So it really has to work with what's there. So that's the first one. The second is the policy. So it's important an organization controls who gets which credentials. So for example, if they have a new employee on board, how do I make sure as part of that HR onboarding process, that employee gets the right credentials to the right system? If I have a contractor or if I have a third-party supplier, how do I make sure that they get the right system access? And you may have different rules for different people. So employers may have full access into the systems. Contractors may just be able to access some systems. Financial people may also use signed emails. So may need completely different credentials. It may be that you need to authorize some credentials at a higher level. So for example, if you're issuing credentials to a system administrator who can go in and switch on or off your firewalls, you really want to be sure that they're the right people before you do that. So you may want to have witnesses present to do that. So there's all these policies and rules. And tied up in that, very importantly, is audit. So if people come in and audit your company for GDPR or POPI, for example, they want to say, okay, show me how you're managing who can access your systems. So that system needs to be able to show you, these are the people with active credentials, these are when they expire, this is when it was revoked, etc. So you've got that visibility of who can access your systems. And the final one is lifecycle management. So this is credentials will be issued, but as you mentioned earlier, Herman, people leave organizations. What you don't want to do is to have somebody leave and their credentials still be valid a week later, because they'll come in and do damage. So you need to make sure that as their account is disabled in the directory or SailPoint says this person's no longer valid, your credential management system can revoke their smart card, their virtual card, their mobile ID. So all of that life cycle management, maintaining the status of that credential is really, really important.
Okay, you mentioned something now which I haven't even thought of, and that is really if with the POPI that's coming in, the regulator can potentially come in and ask questions around how do you protect the data.
Yeah.
So this is a very nice way of actually then taking the regulator or the person that is the auditor and take them through the process and being able to actually show them exactly how you manage the life cycle of an employee or the credentials of an employee in this entire life cycle where this person sits. Is it possible to, how would they as an employee manage forgotten passwords as an example, credentials as an example, or how do you forget an employee once they've left the organization? Because you're quite right, I think that's probably one of the biggest problems in any organization is an employee that has left the organization, and you will find months down the line where this employee's credentials is still actually active and valid, and that in itself is a big problem. So things like revocation. How do you revoke a person's information or their accounts if they move up or move down or move sideways? Because it's not just simply activating a person's account and then forgetting about it. So many times we've also found that where a person was appointed in one position, that person was now redistributed to another position, or they moved up in life, and all of a sudden you're sitting with a person, a manager that has got credentials that they used before, that was never revoked when they moved up, and therefore now they're sitting with all this power, if I can call it that, through the different credentials that they have, and or accesses that they have. And it's always a problem for any organization to, how do you manage that? So if there's an easier, seamless, cleaner way of doing things, really, I think that adds the additional benefit over and above the fact that you have better control over your employees and what they access. You have also the benefit of migrating users in and out of the system seamlessly. Yeah,
I completely agree. And that really is what my company, Intercede, has been, our company, I don't own it, I just work there, just to be clear. So Intercede, I've been doing for the last 20 years with our MyID software. So that's, the bottom line is credentials need managing. If they just go out there and they're unmanaged, you can't trust them. You don't know who's got them. You don't know if they're still valid. You can't deal with them expiring. So a credential management system is all about making sure that the right people have the right credentials and they can access the systems they need to do so. And that's really what our MyID software is all about. And in summary, it's about how do I deploy and manage these credentials simply and at scale. It's probably worth just touching on an actual real world use case of how it's used to help people understand that. So the example we're just looking at the moment happens to be a bank, they're a European bank, they're based in 3 countries, got about 27,000 users, over about 160 branches. And they use MyID, in this case, to connect to a source of user data. So that's the directory where the user information comes from. And back to your revocation, if the user account is cancelled in the directory, MyID will automatically spot that and automatically revoke their credentials. So within seconds, they can no longer access systems. We also have a certificate authority here. So that's the software that actually issues the certificates, but we're sat in front of it, making sure the right people get the right certificates. We have that hardware security module, so that encrypts sensitive data both in transit and in the MyID database. And that's data such as card keys and private keys and these sorts of things. So we make sure that everything is very secure. So for example, if you need to read secure emails, you need to have the same key on different devices to do that, on your smart card and on your phone, for example. So we use that to help protect that data as we're moving it between systems in a highly secure manner. The most important piece is probably on the right-hand side here, where we have the people who actually use the system. So we have the administrators. Back to my previous slides of policy. These are the people who set the policy up. Who's allowed to get what credentials? People in these areas get these credentials. These people in this country can only manage people in their own country. This person down at a branch level can provide help desk services to people within their particular region, for example. So this tends to be a one-off activity. You set your policies up, and my idea is very much about how do I configure the system to meet my business process, as opposed to having to change your business process to meet the system. That's quite a big deal. So that's that's the administrators. The operators are the people who use the system day to day to issue credentials. So a new employee starts, I issue them a credential. I may need to go review something. If we've had an employee that's suspected, I need to look at who issued them the credential, what could it do, etc., etc. So all of that full audit. So they're providing help desk facilities to people on a day-by-day basis. And then we have the end users themselves. So self-service is a very big factor when it comes to cost reduction here. So if you can allow end users to help themselves in a simple manner, you don't have to have a huge expensive help desk sat there helping those end users out. So that's important too. So those end users, for example, may do things such as collect updates to their credential. So let's say I have a certificate that's about to expire. On their desktop, my ID would pop up and say, hey, Alan, your certificate's about to expire. Do you want to collect a new one now? And you'd say, no, I'm just about to go into a meeting. And then the next day it'll pop up and tell you again. You say yes and collect it. And those operators will be able to say who's collected it, who's still outstanding, who's got a problem, etc. So those end users can do that at their own desktop. This particular example, they've started out rolling out smart cards and virtual smart cards, depending on the role of the people. Back in the days when we were all in offices, they tended to have physical cards at desktops and virtual cards for people traveling with laptops. Now we're more remote. They're extending the use of virtual cards. And they're also looking to roll out mobile devices as well. So we can push certificates into MDMs, such as AirWatch and Microsoft Intune, for example, if you need secure access or read secure email. We have customers who use the mobile phones for accessing secure Wi-Fi, where we're just pushing them directly to the device. So they're looking at extending that. Now they've seen the benefits of physical cards and virtual cards on, a lot of business these days is on the mobile. How can I do that from the mobile device as well? So it's just an example of typically a combination of the integration, so the touch points into the back-end systems, the certificate authority, the directory, the policy setting, so that administrator is the person or people setting these are the rules around credential management, and then the actual lifecycle management, which is a combination of the operator and the end user actually issuing and managing those credentials.
Well, you know what, there's two big things that I can take away from here. First of all is what you said is that the company doesn't need to change their systems. The solution really sits in the middle and it manages all the credentials for everything. So it's really almost plugging it in the middle, and the rest would still run as it is intended to, which I think is a big benefit, so that you don't have to spend time and effort and energy in redeploying, redeveloping, rechanging your environment as a company simply just to install the solution. I think that for me is a big bonus. The second thing I also take away from this discussion is really that the transportation or the transportability of the solution. You mentioned mobile devices, etc., and that's notoriously always been a very difficult environment to get right, to run the solutions on properly. And I do think, with the way things are going right now, people starting to work more and more from home, away from the office, people's always been traveling, those types of things, they need this type of environment on their mobile devices. So if that is achievable, I think that's the second big benefit for me as well from the solution, is that it basically runs anywhere and everywhere. So I think for an organization looking at the solution, over and above the security is also the ease of use, the ease of integration and managing their users through the solution. Makes sense. Thank you very much. I think we've spoken quite a lot, and there's been a lot of things that we actually breathed in the air a bit. I think there's a lot of opportunities, and people that would listen into this discussion would really understand that this is absolutely a solution that one can look at. So maybe in summary, what are the things that you would consider in mentioning again?
Okay, so what are the most important things for somebody to consider? Let's see if I can summarize them as 3. So the first one I'd say is proven. If you're going to invest in a system to improve your security, it's got to work. You can't put money into something that is just not going to work and not secure you. So I would look for things that have been actually tried and tested in the real world, not just on some paid for marketing survey or some shiny website, but things that have been deployed in organizations like me out there in the real world at scale, securing real things. That is number 1, I think. And that's not just from a security perspective, proven security, but from the reality is some of this stuff's quite difficult, and the longer a system's been out there and it's being used, the more likely it's going to have that level of flexibility and maturity to do what you want, to do what you need. So that's the first one, that proven one. The second one is a point, we both mentioned this, is the importance of that ease of use and coming down to the end user. So it has to be a system that's user focused. PKI, be it on a smart card with a simple PIN, or be it on a mobile device with Face ID or Touch ID, actually is one of the few security solutions that has the ability to make an end user's life better. You can, with this, get rid of the password. Yes, that improves your security, but as a user, you no longer have to have that every 3 months. I've got to change my password. What did I use last time? I can't remember it anymore. I end up writing it down. All of that pain, which is horrible. I then forget it. I ring the help desk. There's a cost. All of that can go away because something like a PIN doesn't actually travel over the network. All it does is unlock access to that private key locally. It can be simple, and it doesn't have to be changed all the time. So that is a way more secure way of doing it, and that allows you to have something that actually makes the end user's life better. So that user focused is important, both from a day-to-day usage of it and how do I manage it. So self-service applications to help the users through processes. So that's really important. And probably the third one I'd say is technology independence. So don't buy something that locks you into one particular vendor or technology only and you can never change from it. So years ago when FIPS 201 in the US started out, it was a smart card and that was it. And that's all you could use as your identity. It then moved on to support mobile as well. The next version coming out will also move on to support FIDO. So we've been making sure our product also does that. So we have customers today using smart cards, virtual smart cards, mobile ID, iOS, Android, USB keys, we don't care. They've swapped one CA to another CA partway through, that's fine. And they're starting to investigate Windows Hello for Business and FIDO at the moment. So it's important that that technology independence gives you a wide range of choice for today, but is also going to be there to support you as you move forward tomorrow. So I don't know how we'll all be authenticating in 5 years' time, but I do know that my ID will support that because that's what our customers are demanding. So those 3 things really, the proven security, user-focused, and technology independence.
Excellent, thank you. So guys, there you've got it. I think we've said enough. The product, just once again, if you really interested and you would like to know a bit more, it's called Intercede My ID. Alan Storey, thank you very much for sharing with us. I think it's been quite insightful, and hopefully, I think people will start to understand that this is the next step in ensuring that we as an entity or a company remain safe, that our people remain safe, and that we enable our people to traverse safely through the systems by applying something like PKI and cryptography to ensure that who is allowed into the system is really the ones that should be there. So thank you very much for joining us and chatting to us. So my name, Herman Kriel, crypto, cybersecurity. responsible for crypto, amongst other things. Guys, please reach out to us. Let's talk about the product. Brilliant product, and we can definitely help you with your environment. Thanks again.
Thank you, Herman.
Bye then.